thanks for stopping by for this clinic. That was a piece that I played in a Ronnie Scott's event, an LP event, a couple of years back. Now I'm playing that on the Pandero, but actually the technique I'm using is South Indian Kanjira technique, which is an amazing small hand drum found in the south of India, single-headed tambourine-like drum with only one single jingle. So the difference being, of course, with the Pandero is it's got many jingles and it's a lot bigger. The Kanjira itself is about 7 inches in diameter. So that whole piece was in 4/4, and there were various sort of compositions. And I want to talk a little bit about how some of those compositions are structured and how some of the mathematics of it works. Now, the piece I'm going to talk about, the small segment I'm going to talk about first of all, is actually something that I did with Benny Greb a few years back on his first DVD on Hudson Music. And for those of you who've seen it, it was tabla and snare drum. And we were out in the, on a mountain in Bavaria. It was a very cool presentation, very unusual, especially, just being tabla and snare drum. It was a great moment, actually, to do that, great experience. So the composition that we start with on that DVD, I used in this composition, and you might recognise it. It's in 4/4. So there are a few things in there that are kind of interesting talking points. The first thing that's very important in looking at a lot of these rhythmic structures is to boil it back down to its most basic, components, and then work up from there, and then you can see how it's all structured, and then that can inform how you develop your own vocabulary in a lot of this type of material, particularly for composition or for solo work, and creating kind of different phrases that travel over the timeline and present different rhythmic solutions. So the actual core to this whole piece, if we strip away the 30-second notes and we just keep it as basically as 16th notes, the actual chord is so simple that it's almost unbelievable. So the core to it is a very simple rhythm. So a really simple rhythm. So that's the starting point. And with a lot of the Indian rhythmic compositional work, it's quite amazing actually when you start to pin it back and start to look at the actual core material, and sometimes the starting point is very simple, as in this piece. So so you don't have to do the syllables. You could have a stick in, boom, right, left, right, left, right, right, left, right, right, left, right, left, right, left, whatever. Come up with a sticking and orchestration around and on. So just a very simple pattern. Now, one of the components that you often find in particularly in South Indian rhythm actually, is they'll take let's say you've got a line that repeats 3 times. So that line repeats 3 times in total. Da taki da taki da din da din da dum. 2 taki da taki da din da dum. 3 taki da taki da din da dum. So it's repeated 3 times. Now, one of the exciting things that they will do with rhythms like this is just start to move bits around. It's like having imagine that your rhythmic work is on a Rubik cube or something, or one of those little flat things where you move the squares around. There's one empty square and you move the squares around to kind of get different combinations. They tend to think of rhythm in in that way, or that's one of the ways they think about it, as having building blocks, a very modular approach that they'll rearrange stuff with. So if we look at the, we split that into two parts, that basic rhythm. We got ta, takita, takita, the first part, and then dinta, tom, the second part. Okay, so what will often happen is we've got this line repeating 3 times, whatever, like this line or another line or whatever, you know, rhythmic work, the concept is the same. So you take something from the first line, which makes the first line shorter, and you add it to the third line, which makes the third line longer. Overall, of course, because you're just moving things around within the structure, the overall length of it stays the same. So it's a very simple idea that can be, you know, very, very, very effective indeed. So in this instance, I've got here on the screen, dinta, ringed as 2 little units. We think of those as separate units. So what we're going to do is going to take one of those circled dinta, and we're going to put it on the end. So the first line, when you repeat it, you'll just have dinta once. The second time will be the same as the original core phrase, dinta, dinta, so twice. And the third time, it'll be 3 times, dinta, dinta, dinta. So then you have something that goes across the bar lines in a really interesting way. So it's a very simple phrase in the beginning, as we know. Really simple. And we're just rearranging it. So we're putting the bit from the first one onto the third one. So then we have da da kita da kita dinta dom da da kita da kita dinta dinta dom da da kita dinta 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 dom. So that's it. Obviously ends in the middle of nowhere because we need to add another little bit onto the end of it. So that's the basic premise of the beginning part. Okay. So then takita becomes tadikita taka tadikita taka. So instead of 16ths, you're going to make it into 32nd notes. So then if we go back to the beginning, the core phrase, the basic simple phrase, da takita takita dinta dinta dom, and make that with the 32nd notes, da tadikita taka dinta dinta dom, da tadikita taka dinta dinta dom. Then you need to kind of come up with a sticking and an orchestration for the 32nd notes. So it could be, you know, right, left, left, left. I like to use right, left, right, left. It has a very kind of offbeat flow to it, more than right, left, left. Tends to feel a little bit on the beat, if you like. Whereas a lot of the Indian you know, fast rolling technique has more of an offbeat sort of, you know, displaced kind of feel to it, with a lot of the accent placements, with the way that the patterns are you know, fingered on the tabla or you know, different instruments. So that's why I prefer right, left, right, left, a group of 6. Da tadikita taka dinta dinta dom. So that's what we have now, all together with the reduction of the first line and the expansion of the third line. We have da tadikita taka dinta dom, da tadikita taka dinta dinta dom, da tadikita taka dinta 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 dom. So again, ending in the middle of nowhere at the moment. Now, this type of composition in South India is called a corvoy. Normally come in two parts. Like longer compositions, you'll have the first part of the composition would be the theme. So in this instance, you know, the theme is da takita takita dinta dinta dom is the theme, and then the second part will use the syllables ta di gin na tom. Group of 5, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how the groups of 5 can be manipulated into groups of 6, 7, 8 and 9 later on. But in the beginning, we're just going to look at 3 groups of 5. So that will then fill up, you know, 4 bars of 4/4 in total. So gets added to the end. And again, you'd have a sticking right, left, right, right, left, right, left, right, right, left, right, left, right, right, left, bang. So you'd have a sticking in an orchestration or whatever, you know, whatever you'd do to elaborate with that. So this idea in South India is called an arudi. There's a few different names for it actually. Arudi, or in North India it's called a Tihai. The two main systems in India are, in the north you have Hindustani classical music, and in the south you have Carnatic and classical music. So basically an arudi or a Tihai is a basic phrase repeated 3 times, calculated so as to end on the downbeat. So there's another caveat to that I'm going to talk about after that. But let's just first add that group of 5. So we got da da kita da kita tinta dom da da kita da kita tinta tinta dom da da kita da kita tinta 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 dom da ti kita dom da ti kita dom da ti kita dom da. So the last tum of the basic phrase becomes a dotted 8th note, dunga, and then you have the 3 groups of 5. So that's kind of takes you from downbeat to downbeat over 16 beats. Da da di kita da di kita da din da dum da da di kita da di kita da din da dum da da di kita da di kita da din da dum da di kita dum da di kita dum da di kita dum da. So 8 beats. The clapping cycle: 1, 2, the little finger; 3, the next ring finger; 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, then back to 1 again. So we're not going to go into that now, but you know, this is called Adi Tala, or Chatu Rujrajati Tiruputta Talam for the more keener Indian experts out there. So now we've got the whole composition, basically the basic beginning of the whole composition, ending with the three groups of 5. So what we've got, just to summarise, is we've got the basic phrase reduced, the basic phrase original length, basic phrase extended, plus 3 groups of 5. Now, I said there's a caveat to the 3 groups of 5, or a Tihai. So there's one key difference that you'll find in North Indian rhythmic calculation and South Indian rhythmic calculation. So let's just stick with our groups of 5, okay? Now in South India, they would fill up the bar leading to the downbeat, and then they would add the downbeat on the end of it. So as we've had now, so tum ta, you've added ta onto the end of it. Now in North India, they would approach it in a different way. They would include the downbeat in the overall calculation. So they'd use completely different syllables. I'm going to stick with the same South Indian syllables just to demonstrate this. So that North Indian style will be tati kita tum tati kita tum tati kita tum. So you can see that they've contained the basic phrase contains the downbeat at the end of it. So the method of calculations in the north and the south are somewhat different for a lot of rhythmic composition. So here on the screen we can see the two different variations. South Indian tati kita tum tati kita tum tati kita tum ta, and North Indian tati kita tum tati kita tum tati kita tum. So North Indian includes a downbeat, South Indian adds the downbeat afterwards. So the next part of the you could just play that. You just play that and finish fine, or you can play it 3 times, all in all. Or you can extend it. You can extend the ending. So what we had in the video with Benny and on this particular recording, we had an extended end, and that involved developing the syllables tati gina tum in a slightly different way. Remember I said earlier we're going to develop groups of 5 from that, groups of 6, groups of 7, groups of 8 and groups of 9. So the way that's done, there's numerous ways that it's done. But one of the ways that it's done is to simply add gaps. So tati ginatom is 5, tati ginatom is 6, tati ginatom. So we've added one gap. Tati ginatom, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, tati ginatom. Or 7, you add 2 gaps. Tati ginatom, tati ginatom, tati ginatom, tati ginatom, ta. 8, tati ginatom, tati ginatom, tati ginatom, ta. And 9, now you've got 4 gaps. Tati ginatom, tati ginatom, tati ginatom, tati ginatom, ta. So these units are very useful in composition of actual phrases that you would play, but they're also very useful, as we're going to find out, in the analysing the additional section we're going to add on to the end of it. They're very useful in terms of counting gaps as well. One of the tricks that Indian performers often use is to use these phonetics to count gaps. So they might, in their mind, they'll be thinking of the, tati ginatum, tati ginatum, as the gaps, but not playing them. So, for example, let's just say you had, a phrase, 3 groups of 5 and a group of 7. Tati gitatum, tati gitatum, tati gitatum, ta. Tati gitatum, tati gitatum, tati gitatum, ta. Tati gitatum, tati gitatum, tati gitatum, ta. Ti ginatum, tati gitatum, tati gitatum, tati gitatum, ta. Ti ginatum. So it's a good way to count gaps, actually, to have these little. It's an aside, but it's a very useful thing to have, in your repertoire, counting odd gaps and doing different material. So after the 3 groups of 5, back to our composition now. After the 3 groups of 5. We have a gap of 9, then we have 3 groups of 6, another gap of 9, and then we have 3 groups of 7. The change being that the 3 groups of 7 will be 3 in the space of 4. Okay, so it slows down to the slower level triplets from where we are. So with these type of things, when you get, this is kind of almost like an elongated, longer Tihai. One of the important things about that is the gaps will always be the same. So you wouldn't have the first gap of 7 and the second gap of 9, for example, or something like that. It's all, the gaps are kind of pretty much the same. So the whole composition, going back again, with the extended end. So you can see now how it's all fitted together. So if we go tati gitatum, tati gitatum, tati gitatum, ta is the downbeat. So we'll start from there, just to demonstrate, what this final additional bit on the end is. So we got tati gitatum, tati gitatum, tati gitatum, tati gitatum, ta, tati gitatum, tati gitatum, tati gitatum, ta. So we're gap of 9, tati gitatum. And then we have 3 groups of 6, tati, gitatum, tati, gitatum, tati, gitatum, gap of 9, tati, gitatum. And then we have 3 groups of 7 as triplets, tati, gitatum, tati, gitatum, tati, gitatum, ta. So this modulation is a very common thing that you'll find in North and South Indian music, actually. South Indian is definitely a big speciality, and you can take a lot of these phrases. So there we've got 3 in the space of 4. So you can use that as a simple exercise. You just clap quarter notes, not really in any time cycle as such. We don't need to be for the exercise. D, get the dum da, D, get the dum da, D, get the dum. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1. So you can take any sort of phrase like that. Do 4 in 16th notes and you know, then 3 in the slower triplets, or you know, you could do 2 in 16th notes and 3 in the in faster triplets. So there's lots of different ways you could do it. Now this methodology of switching gears and modulating and doing stuff like that is very very commonplace across the whole of the classical Indian percussion world. In North India they have a composition called Kaida, which is a kind of like a theme and variation composition, very elaborate. So you'll kind of learn, you know, a basic theme. In the beginning, it'll be very simple stuff. But then for each one of these themes, you learn, you know, 50, 60 different variations on that theme. So it's a brilliant way to develop a language and a vocabulary, because you're building it up in an entirely logical manner. So let's take, for example, a longer composition. Again, it's in 4/4. Everything's going to be in 4/4 for this. Da gen da ti da da tedikita da tedikita da tedikita da ti da gen da ti da gen da ga tu na gen da. So this is a kaida from North India, and traditionally in the beginning of the solo, or you know, a little bit into the solo, when they start to play a couple of kaidas with lots of variations and stuff, traditionally what they would do is start out at a you know, slower tempo, half speed. Well, the tempo is the same, but the slower note rate. So you know, 8th notes, for example. Then they would go into the same thing into triplets, 8th note triplets, and then they would go into 16th notes. And then once they were in 16th notes, or the faster level of the 3, you know, obviously if you started in 16th notes and did 16th note triplets and then 32nd notes, then it's the same thing, same relationship between the three different parts. So once they're into that, then they would you know, do all the variations, conclude with a very big long Tihai type structure. Kind of chakradar is can be called, or there's other types of conclusions that they can you know, come up with. So if we look at this composition, and I'll go single, double, single 1.5 times speed, which is called adilai in North India, and then double. So you'd have da gen da ti da da tedikita da tedikita da tedikita da ti da gen da ti da gen da ga tu na gen da gen da ti da da tedikita da tedikita da tedikita da ti da gen da ti da da ga tu na gen da gen da ti da da tedikita da tedikita da tedikita da ti da gen da ti da gen da ga tu na gen da gen da ti da da tedikita da tedikita da tedikita da ti da gen da ga tu na gen da gen da ti da da tedikita da tedikita da ti da gen da ti da gen da ga tu na gen da gen da ti da da tedikita da tedikita da ti da gen da ti da gen da ga ti na gen da. So then they're up to, you know, the full speed of the composition, and then they would take their variations and you know, kind of maneuver through with all of the different kind of theme variations that they would come up with, and then include it. So it's a very logical way to you know, to develop a solo, and it's a brilliant way to start structuring what you do, and even as a you know, percussionist or drum set player or you know, whatever, you can also kind of think in some of these ways. So the idea of modulation, the idea of theme development by coming up with variations, and the logic of it is that if you've got a theme, let's say for example it was on drum set and you had a theme that involved you know, small tom, floor tom, snare drum and a cowbell. Okay, so that's it, you know, and bass drum. So you got, and it's using a paradiddle between the some sort of paradiddle pattern between the voices. Now, all of the variations that you would come up with, or traditionally, would have to only involve those sounds. There are some changes. You can develop a kaida later on and add different things, but generally speaking, the main idea is that it's based on that combination of sounds, and would be roughly based on the paradiddle for most of it. So, for example, you wouldn't start doing like double bass drum and chinas or something, or kind of free random choices that aren't related to the actual theme. One of the great things about that is it creates a discipline, in that you've got certain amount of tools at your fingertips with this this theme that you've got, and you have to develop everything out of that. Now, another thing that's very interesting and important with the idea of the North Indian theme and variation compositions is that they come with something called tali and kali. Well, a tali and kali is actually part of the rhythmic system itself. It means empty and full, if you like. It's a very simple, literal way of doing it. So with a lot of the way that translates into in tabla playing, for example, is that the empty sections traditionally wouldn't have any an open bass drum sounds in it from the baya, from the bass tabla. And so what that does, it creates a section that's actually audibly different from the other section. So you've immediately created some sort of rhythmic work that breathes, because you've got sections that don't have the open bass drum in it, and it's always a specific section. In most time cycles, not all, it's the first half of the second half. So if you had a 16 beat time cycle, it would be 9, 10, 11 and 12 beats that wouldn't have any open bass drum in it. So that's with the time cycles. With the theme and variation compositions, what happens is the composition, the theme and each of the variations gets split into two halves. The second half is identical to the first half, but the first half of the second half does not have any open bass drum sounds in it. So that's how tali and kali is differentiated within the compositions and within the time cycles. I remember seeing Benny Greb actually talk a little bit in one of his clinics about this idea of phrase memory that I think is really really interesting, and it kind of is related to this because the kaidas and the themes and the variations come in two identical halves. And the exercise that he was posing to people was to play, just have two drums. So you could have a snare drum and a floor tom, or two snare drums, or whatever, two sound sources. And you play the same thing. You play something, from your, let's say you start with two quarter notes long. You play a pattern, that. And then you play exactly the same thing on the second drum. Then you go back to the first drum and you improvise another phrase over 2 beats, and then you mimic that on the second drum. So this becomes like an exercise. So you're basically developing your rhythm memory. So you do this phrase on the first drum, you repeat it exactly verbatim on the second drum. And then you extend it. Then you extend it to 3 quarter notes, and then to 4 and 5 and 6. And it's a way of developing your, rhythmic memory. And also, rather than being, sometimes we'll throw phraseology out and throw phrases out, and they just come out and that's brilliant and everything. But it's also good to be able to have like a mental control of it in the sense that you know what you've done and you can replicate it. So you're in more control of all the tools that you have, at your fingertips, and your brain is massively part of the process. And that's one of the things that we really notice from the study of Indian rhythm, is how it's a perfect balance really between the intuitive and the scientific, if you like. Thinking and feeling is combined, because a lot of the stuff is structured with a lot of thought, but then that just basically is building your vocabulary. It's like if you learn a language, and the more words you learn and the more phrases you learn and the more ways you have of articulating the things that you think, then the better equipped you are to be able to deliver something, you know, in the language, or if we compare that to music, then rhythmically or musically, or you know, musically and rhythmically, hopefully. But you know, it could be melody, it could be rhythm, it could be, you know, any part of the whole sort of musical matrix. So having some of that mental facility, of course, not to interfere with the emotional and intuitive side of it. That's so special in bringing a lot of things to the fore in our playing. So for me, a study of Indian percussion was completely eye-opening on every level, because it took me to such different avenues of understanding. And these points that I've spoken about here are just a couple of points, really, of a couple of pointers of some of the things that you can you know, use. But the Indian rhythmic world has a huge arsenal of rhythmic devices and systems and compositional forms and ways that you can you know, take, you know, a basic rhythmic idea, as we did in the beginning with this session, and extend it further into whichever direction you know, you want. At the end of the day, I think if you vocalize it, however it would be, you know, that's not necessarily your end goal with it, but I think vocalizing rhythm is really important. Vocalizing with a corner points, quarter note, or whatever, time cycle, if you want to study time cycles or specific ways of top and tailing a groove length, and then start to orchestrate it. So for me, I think a logical way to do that is to start off on the snare drum with a sticking, and then, you know, substitute the clapping with an ostinato, foot ostinato, some sort of repetitive pattern, and then orchestrate around the drums, and then start to come up with these different little rhythmic nuggets that you can sort of impose into your general groove flow. Because at the end of the day, whatever you you know, a lot of this stuff is great rhythm training, but at the end of the day, you have to be able to utilize that in your own rhythmic world, which, you know, that's really where the creativity and the personality and the voice comes into it. That's really where everyone is made into the individual that they thankfully are. So we're going to wind up. I'm just going to you know, show you another clip from the LP Ronnie Scott's gig. Now this is on cajon. One of the things that I love to do is to you know, kind of integrate hybrid ideas and take Indian rhythms and play them on you know, non-Indian drums, or vice versa, you know. And this is obviously Spanish cajon, and it's a fairly formal South Indian rhythmic structure, rhythmic, you know, top and tailing it all in a very fairly traditional way. It's all in 4/4, so you can follow it with the bells. You can kind of hear where it's going, and you can listen out for some of the modulations and some of the, you know, the time shifts and how some of the phrases are extended and reduced, and hopefully some of these basic simple you know, ideas can be brought into your own playing. You know, take a phrase and you know, reduce it and extend it, and see where you go with it. The whole Indian study is an amazing magical world, and it can really cross-fertilise into you know, your contemporary playing and your contemporary work as well. So thanks for checking it out. You can visit me at www.petelockett.info on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. You know, not I ever look at them anymore. Anyway,